Imagine you've traveled back in time, expecting to witness the greatest wonder of antiquity, the legendary temple of Artemis at Ephesus. But instead of grandeur and inspiration, you're surrounded by endless dirt, boredom, and relentless routine. Workers are arguing, architects bicker gloomily, priests are stealing gold, and the goddess herself seems utterly indifferent to the suffering of her worshippers. Are you ready for an ironic, gloomy, and painfully realistic story about what history truly looked like? Welcome to Ephesus, the city where boredom is the only real wonder. But before we start, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is right now. I'm very curious to see who's joining us today. And now, make yourself comfortable. We're about to begin. You stand silently on the hot, dusty streets of ancient Ephesus, feeling slightly annoyed and mildly disappointed at finding yourself, once again, transported to another supposedly fascinating era of human history. You've been through this experience enough times to recognize that the excitement people feel about ancient civilizations is rarely justified. Instead, it's usually accompanied by heat, discomfort, and an unsettling amount of dirt. Ephesus, as you're quickly discovering, fits perfectly into that expectation. Around you, life proceeds at an excruciatingly slow pace. There is a palpable lethargy in the air, as though the city itself is groaning under the relentless sun, hoping, vainly, for some small reprieve. Merchants half-heartedly wave flies away from their dried figs and dates, their faces bearing expressions of terminal boredom. They eye you with disinterest, having long grown tired of visitors like you, wanderers seeking a glimpse of something impressive, but finding only sweaty laborers and dubious street food. In the distance, workers move slowly, pulling enormous blocks of marble toward what you assume must be the construction site of the temple. It is an agonizing sight. Each block moves forward inch by inch, propelled by grumbling men whose attitudes suggest they'd rather be doing almost anything else. Their misery is almost palpable. You feel a reluctant sympathy, though it's tempered by a nagging suspicion that none of this is strictly necessary. You decide to approach a group of onlookers who have gathered near a fountain in the center of town. As you edge closer, you overhear their conversation. They're talking, predictably, about the temple. One older man, his robes gray and dusty, launches into a monologue about why he thinks building this temple is an incredibly foolish endeavor. Listen carefully. He begins with a long, resigned sigh. People speak of building a temple for Artemis as if it were a great gift to the goddess. But tell me, do you think Artemis really cares whether she receives a giant temple or not? Do the gods truly concern themselves with such earthly trivialities? His audience, weary but polite, murmurs vague agreement. You see, he continues, now raising a finger and looking around solemnly. Many years ago, our city fathers spent months deciding where this temple should stand. Months, my friends. They argued endlessly, as though Artemis herself would smite them if they placed it wrongly. The first proposed location was atop a small hill where it might overlook the entire city, but some said the hill was too exposed, too easily assaulted by bandits. You find yourself listening despite yourself, your interest piqued by the pointless intensity of the narrative. You feel strangely drawn to stories of futility and absurdity. It is comforting in a perverse way to know humanity has always been this way. And so, the man drones on, they chose another spot near the river, believing it auspicious to have the temple reflected in the water's calm surface. But soon enough, someone pointed out that the river floods every spring, and we can't exactly build a great temple just to watch it sink beneath the waves every year. The gathered listeners sigh collectively, having heard and all this before. You sense their irritation, but also their unwillingness to interrupt, perhaps out of pity, perhaps from pure apathy. So, they moved the site again, the storyteller intones dramatically. They considered an olive grove sacred and beautiful, but one evening, a passing prophet claimed the grove was cursed, and that building there would anger the gods. This, of course, frightened our leaders, who quickly abandoned that plan as well. You find yourself involuntarily shaking your head. How utterly predictable, you think, humanity endlessly circling in indecision. You're briefly amused by the thought that you traveled through time only to be treated to the tedious bureaucracy of ancient city planning. Eventually, after wasting many months and likely infuriating Artemis herself with their indecisiveness, they settled on the place they have chosen now, the man concludes, pointing toward the construction site with undisguised disdain. And do you know why they finally chose that particular place? Because they ran out of other ideas, my friends. They simply gave up. He shrugs, looking mildly triumphant, yet simultaneously defeated. So now we build the temple there, dragging stones across the city for all eternity. The crowd disperses slowly, muttering softly about their tasks and appointments. You remain standing there, absorbing the palpable pessimism of the old man's speech. You can't help but agree with him. The temple, supposedly destined to become one of the wonders of the world, feels terribly insignificant now. You decide to move closer to the construction itself, hoping perhaps the scale and grandeur of the project might offer at least some mild distraction. Approaching, you see the workers more clearly. They're covered in a fine, chalky dust that clings to their sweat soaked skin. Their faces display the weary indifference of men who have long ago abandoned all hope of job satisfaction. One of them, a middle aged man with deep set eyes, leans heavily against a stone, wiping sweat from his forehead. He notices you and, mistaking your curiosity for genuine interest, begins to explain the process in excruciating detail. We've got to bring these blocks from miles away, he says in a voice that sounds permanently tired. Each stone must be perfect, carved exactly right. But of course, they're rarely perfect. Someone always measures incorrectly, or the stone cracks under pressure, or it slips and falls on someone's foot. Oh, you should hear the curses that fly on days like that. He laughs bitterly, glancing up at the mercilessly bright sky. This temple may look beautiful someday, perhaps after we're all long gone, but to us, It's just endless work. You nod politely, already bored by the intricacies he's begun detailing: tools, ropes, levers, weights. Each explanation seems to sap more energy from you, and soon your attention drifts to the view around the city, with its blend of grimy streets and half finished marble facades. As your gaze wanders, you consider, with a certain resigned clarity, that the truly boring part of history is not the events themselves, but the endlessly repetitive processes humans go through to achieve their goals. It's the dullness of long days spent under the sun, the monotony of routine labor, the droning speeches of self important people who mistake their own voice for wisdom. Ephesus, with its grand ambitions and dusty reality, feels suddenly very familiar. As the sun begins to set, you turn your gaze back to the temple site, where shadows now stretch long across the ground. The workers are leaving, their faces resigned to the idea that tomorrow will be exactly like today: tedious, uncomfortable, repetitive. You sigh deeply, knowing your visit to ancient Ephesus will likely be just the same: tedious, uncomfortable, repetitive. But you remain, nonetheless, mildly curious. Perhaps the boredom itself is the real historical truth, the essence of human civilization that will endure long after marble temples crumble to dust. And with that thought, you prepare yourself for yet another day in this wonderfully disappointing corner of ancient history. Morning arrives with a kind of reluctant inevitability, the sky turning from dark, velvet blue to a pale, washed out yellow. You awake slowly, your body aching from an unforgiving night spent on a straw filled mat that offered neither softness nor comfort. Even your sleep has been appropriately tedious. Yet somehow, this perfectly suits your mood. After all, you're here not to enjoy, but to quietly suffer through history as it unfolds in its tedious detail. You leave your modest lodging and make your way toward the construction site, your sandals grinding against gravel and dirt that seems purposely designed to cling annoyingly to your feet. As you near the site, you sense a weary, almost palpable resignation among the gathered workers. Today marks the official start of the temple's foundation work, a supposedly momentous occasion that, judging from everyone's mood, no one seems eager to celebrate. A tired looking foreman named Diocles stands near a hastily constructed wooden platform, occasionally consulting a roll of parchment. His expression oscillates between frustration and despair as he barks out directions with the enthusiasm of a man ordering his own execution. Workers shuffle slowly into position, reluctantly lifting heavy tools and preparing to dig into the stubborn earth. Begin here, Diocles mumbles, vaguely gesturing toward an area marked by small stakes and twine. And please, for the love of Artemis, dig properly this time. I don't want another lecture from the architects. You briefly wonder if it's possible to feel sympathetic boredom on behalf of a fictional historical foreman, but decide not to delve too deeply into that particular existential rabbit hole. Instead, you observe the workers as they reluctantly strike the hard, rocky soil. Each blow seems to echo an existential sigh. There is no great dignity or noble triumph in this labor, only the weary repetition of endless, thankless toil. As you stand watching, another man sidles up next to you. He introduces himself as Hermogenes, one of the lesser architects, and promptly begins complaining about the construction process in such monotonous detail that you quickly regret not escaping sooner. You know, Hermogenes sighs, rubbing the back of his neck. We argued for months about how deep to set the foundation. Months. Can you imagine anything more tedious? You open your mouth to reply, but he's already continuing, oblivious to your attempted response. They said the temple must be built exactly according to divine proportions. But do the gods really care if the foundation is 3 cubits deeper or shallower? Honestly, it's absurd. But they insisted on making endless measurements. First, we dug one test hole, then another, and each time someone found a flaw, too rocky, too unstable, too muddy, too dry. He pauses, sighing deeply. You nod weakly, hoping your silence might discourage further elaboration, but no such luck awaits you. And you know what happened next? He continues with exaggerated bitterness. After all that arguing, the chief architect, Chersiphron himself, announced that we were going to place the foundations exactly as he had proposed from the very beginning. Can you imagine the frustration? Weeks and weeks of debates just to end up exactly where we started. You consider replying, but by now you've become rather fascinated by Hermogenes' unstoppable rant. It is a strange sort of admiration, one reserved for people who have mastered the art of complaining with exquisite detail. Oh, and let me tell you about the marble, Hermogenes drones on. They insisted we source it from distant quarries because local marble was supposedly too brittle. But everyone knows the real reason was that some high ranking official had financial interests in those distant quarries. So now, every stone must travel for miles, increasing costs, delays, and causing endless grumbling among the workers. You look back at the workers, confirming Hermogenes' bleak description. They do indeed appear to have mastered the art of grumbling. You see that? Hermogenes gestures impatiently at 2 workers arguing heatedly over something as trivial as the placement of a wooden stake. Every decision here involves endless debate. Every detail, every measurement, every tiny choice becomes a tedious nightmare. Honestly, it's a miracle anything gets built at all. You find yourself profoundly captivated by Hermogenes' gloomy honesty. You've never before encountered someone who so perfectly embodies pessimistic realism. In fact, it seems that every person involved with this project is desperately unhappy, yet determinedly resigned to their fate. It's as though the temple's construction itself embodies some great cosmic joke. Turning away, you continue observing the tedious digging. Hour after hour passes, marked only by the slow, rhythmic sound of shovels striking stubborn earth and quiet grumbling of men cursing under their breath. As the sun climbs higher, casting relentless heat upon the workers, Diocles orders them to stop briefly and rest in the shade. But even this brief respite fails to improve anyone's mood. Instead, it seems only to amplify their shared misery. As you watch, you overhear 2 older laborers conversing in hushed, mournful tones. They speak slowly, without urgency, their voices weary with years of disappointment. Do you think this temple will really please Artemis? One worker asks with a resigned sigh. His companion snorts derisively. I doubt Artemis even notices us anymore. Honestly, she's probably grown as tired of our prayers as we have. The first worker nods thoughtfully. Perhaps you're right. Maybe all this, he gestures vaguely at the endless piles of dirt and stone, is just an elaborate way for our leaders to distract us from our miserable lives. His companion shrugs. Even if the temple is finally completed, what difference will it truly make? Will it improve our crops, reduce taxes, or ease our burdens? No. It will be beautiful, perhaps, but it won't change our daily suffering. They fall silent again, returning to their rest. You find yourself agreeing wholeheartedly with their bleak assessment. Looking back at the construction site, you realize the workers have resumed their labor. Their movements remain sluggish and unmotivated, their faces expressions of grim acceptance. Every now and then, a stone shifts awkwardly, causing brief excitement followed by curses and arguments. But these brief disruptions are merely punctuation marks in a long, monotonous sentence of boredom. By late afternoon, you decide you've seen enough. Your fascination with the dreariness of ancient construction techniques has been thoroughly satisfied. As you walk away, the sounds of digging, cursing, and sighing fade behind you. You briefly reflect on what you've witnessed, a perfect encapsulation of human ambition, bureaucratic inertia, and endless tedium. At your modest lodging, you lie down, eyes closed, and let yourself drift toward sleep. As you succumb to the monotonous rhythm of the evening, you think about tomorrow. The temple's construction will continue, another endless day filled with frustration, mistakes, and tiresome human drama. And yet, despite everything, you know you'll return, because the boredom and misery you find here are strangely compelling. After all, isn't that exactly what makes history truly authentic? Not the glorious achievements, but the mundane, endlessly dull reality underlying it all. With this thought, sleep overtakes you, carrying you gently toward another slow, unremarkable morning in ancient Ephesus. Another dreary day unfolds in Ephesus, as if intentionally designed to dampen your spirits further. You wake earlier than you wish to the relentless hammering of distant tools, a noise that manages to convey both monotony and frustration. Your back aches again from the pitifully thin mattress, and you feel a vague resentment toward the universe that seems determined to trap you in this dreary corner of ancient history. Reluctantly, you pull yourself from your uncomfortable bed and step outside into the oppressive heat. The streets are already buzzing with miserable activity. Traders push heavy carts laden with unappetizing produce. Beggars extend their dusty hands, too exhausted even to plead convincingly. You trudge slowly toward the temple construction site, fully aware that today will be precisely like yesterday, only worse. You arrive to find the workers arguing even louder than before. A massive marble column lies broken on its side, surrounded by a swarm of angry laborers and panicking foremen. Their faces are red, flushed from equal parts heat, frustration, and mutual blame. "You dropped it," shouts one worker, stabbing his finger accusingly into another man's chest. "I told you it was leaning, but you ignored me." "Me?" retorts the accused indignantly. "If you'd done your job properly, it wouldn't have shifted. Artemis herself must be laughing at our incompetence." An older foreman, Diocles, rushes over, waving his hands hopelessly, attempting and failing miserably to restore order. His voice, cracked and strained, sounds more exhausted than authoritative. "Enough," he shouts weakly. "We'll never finish if you spend all day arguing." No one pays attention. The arguments continue, drifting into increasingly petty grievances. Who drank too much wine last night? Who took extra bread at lunch? Who complained the loudest about sore feet? The conversation drags on endlessly, each accusation more trivial and tedious than the last. You stand quietly at the edge of this chaos, wondering if Artemis indeed finds amusement in human incompetence. At least someone might derive enjoyment from this mess, even if only divine laughter at mortal foolishness. As the workers grudgingly begin to disperse and resume their tasks, you notice Hermogenes approaching again, his perpetual gloom clearly undiminished since yesterday. You consider avoiding him, but he corners you quickly, eyes filled with bitter satisfaction at having someone willing, or at least unable to escape, to listen to his endless laments. "You see," he begins, nodding solemnly toward the broken column, "I warned them about this very thing. The columns are too heavy, and the ropes we've been using are worn out. But does anyone listen? Of course not." You nod politely, knowing your acknowledgement will only encourage him, but finding yourself unable to stop your courteous habit. Now they'll argue about who's at fault for days, maybe even weeks. Hermogenes continues gloomily. "You see, my friend, this temple isn't merely being built, it's being debated into existence. By the time it's done, if it ever gets done, we'll have spent more time fighting over it than actually constructing it." His expression becomes even gloomier as he continues. "Do you know what else they're arguing about now? Whether to use iron or bronze for the brackets holding the stones. Can you imagine a more tedious argument? Before you can even attempt a response, he plunges onward. Iron rusts, they say. Bronze corrodes more slowly, but it's expensive. So they argue back and forth, endlessly, day after day. And yet, meanwhile, our columns topple and our stones crumble. He sighs dramatically, clearly savoring his own despair. You find yourself oddly comforted by Hermogenes' cynicism. At least he's consistent. Nearby, another worker shouts in alarm. A rope holding another enormous marble block begins to fray visibly, unraveling strand by strand. Panic ripples through the sight again, though at this point the worker's fear seems muted by resignation. With a dull snap, the rope finally breaks, dropping the marble block heavily onto the dirt below. The ground shakes slightly beneath your feet, and you hear Diocles' weary, defeated voice echoing from the distance. "Just leave it," he calls hopelessly. "We'll deal with it tomorrow." You can see the workers' shoulders slump, the energy draining out of them. The construction site suddenly falls into silence, broken only by murmurs of frustration and low groans of exhaustion. As afternoon approaches, You overhear two younger workers whispering anxiously near a pile of rubble. They seem genuinely worried, not about their work, but about something darker, something deeper. I told you, one whispers urgently, glancing around fearfully. This temple is cursed. Artemis doesn't want it built. Why else would everything go wrong so often? His friend nods nervously. Maybe we angered her. Perhaps we should never have started this project at all. My grandfather always said the goddess despises our vanity. A temple this grand only insults her humility. You feel a strange chill, despite the oppressive heat. Clearly, the men believe their own fears, and their anxiety seems contagious. Even your practiced boredom now tingles slightly with a darker sense of foreboding. Walking closer to the edge of the construction site, you meet a weary priest named Leontius, who stands quietly watching the scene, shaking his head slowly. This temple, he mutters darkly, is already a place of misery. Even if completed, its marble will be stained with sweat, blood, and tears. Artemis may never forgive our vanity. Intrigued by his gloomy pronouncement, you cautiously ask why he feels this way. He eyes you skeptically for a moment before sighing heavily, clearly relishing the opportunity to share his pessimism. Do you know how many injuries we've had? Broken bones, crushed limbs, fevers from exhaustion, all in service of building a temple that might bring us nothing but misfortune. Artemis demands respect, humility, not grand temples built from suffering. You listen quietly, suddenly recognizing that beneath the ordinary drudgery lies something darker, a superstition, a quiet dread that perhaps the gods themselves are against this project. The mundane accidents, the endless arguments, the petty delays, perhaps all of these are indeed a manifestation of some deeper displeasure. The sun begins its slow descent toward the evening, lengthening shadows across the tired, defeated landscape. Workers silently begin to disperse, abandoning the day's futile attempts. The foreman Diocles slumps heavily on a bench, head bowed in exhausted resignation. As you watch him from afar, you wonder briefly if anyone here still genuinely believes in the glory of this temple, or if they're all merely going through the motions, trapped by obligation, routine, and fear. Returning slowly to your lodging through the dusty streets of Ephesus, you reflect on the day's events with bitter amusement. The grand temple of Artemis, intended as a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and reverence for the gods, is instead becoming a monument to human frustration, incompetence, and doubt. And as night falls gently, you drift slowly toward sleep, haunted by the echo of snapping ropes, angry arguments, and whispered fears, aware that tomorrow holds nothing new, merely another cycle of disappointment, dread, and monotony. Yet somehow, perversely, you find yourself drawn back once more, curious to witness just how magnificently humanity can fail in the pursuit of divine greatness. You awaken to yet another unremarkable morning, greeted only by the oppressive silence that follows a particularly unpleasant night's sleep. The constant frustration and misery of Ephesus now feel almost familiar, like an old companion who bores you senseless, but whose predictable tediousness you've grown oddly fond of. The city slowly pulls you back toward its tiresome routine. Walking toward the temple construction site once more, you sense something different today, though whether good or bad, you cannot yet determine. Soon enough, you discover it's neither. Instead, it is something typically human, petty, and depressingly predictable: scandal. A sizable crowd has gathered near the unfinished columns, murmuring nervously among themselves. Curious despite yourself, you edge closer to listen. Two priests, flanked by grim looking magistrates, stand at the center, reading loudly from an elaborately worded proclamation. Their voices drone monotonously, perfectly capturing the drudgery of bureaucratic language. And thus it has come to our attention that significant funds intended for the temple's construction have disappeared without adequate explanation. Therefore, an official investigation is now underway. Around you, whispers ripple through the crowd like a bored wave. People mutter vague accusations, sharing tidbits of gossip whose truth is less important than their ability to briefly relieve boredom. You overhear snippets of half hearted outrage, such as, "It was inevitable. These priests and officials always steal. I heard the architect himself embezzled gold to buy vineyards near Smyrna. Oh, everyone steals something eventually. The only crime here is getting caught." You're impressed by their casual resignation. Clearly, theft and corruption are neither shocking nor even particularly interesting to the citizens of Ephesus. Rather, the scandal is simply another mildly engaging distraction from the endless monotony of their lives. You notice Hermogenes, your persistently gloomy acquaintance, lingering at the edge of the crowd, staring grimly at the unfolding drama. Unable to avoid him in time, he quickly latches on to you like a barnacle, prepared once again to narrate his endless misery. "I warned them," Hermogenes says mournfully, shaking his head with a theatrical sigh. "I told them over and over, if you handle that much money, someone will inevitably steal. And now, look at this mess." Before you can politely excuse yourself, he continues, "Did you know they've already arrested Callistratus, the treasurer? Of course, he denies everything, but nobody believes him. Still, I doubt he acted alone. Corruption runs deeper than one greedy official." You glance back toward the priests, who are now dramatically leading away a confused and frightened man, presumably the accused Callistratus, towards some uncertain and deeply unpleasant fate. His cries of innocence echo weakly against the marble blocks, barely stirring the indifferent crowd. "You see," Hermogenes says grimly, "now there will be trials, endless interrogations, and, worst of all, even more delays. The temple might never be finished, and honestly, perhaps that's for the best." His perpetual gloominess momentarily infects you. The dreary, inevitable predictability of human greed and incompetence fills you with a kind of cynical resignation. As midday approaches, you find yourself drawn toward the agora, where rumors of the scandal have now blossomed into full blown public speculation. Merchants, laborers, and beggars gather in loose groups, discussing the case with a mixture of boredom, cynicism, and mild amusement. It's clear that none of them expect justice to be truly served. Rather, They seem content to use the scandal as a temporary diversion. You drift from one cluster of gossipers to another, absorbing snippets of conversations dripping with apathy. They say the priests bribed the officials to look the other way. Oh, that's old news. I heard the chief magistrate has a mistress whose villa was bought with temple funds. Temple gold is always cursed anyway. Whoever steals it brings misfortune upon themselves. Eventually, your attention settles on a heated debate near the market's central fountain, where two elderly merchants passionately argue in deeply monotonous voices about precisely how corrupt Ephesus truly is. I'm telling you, insists one, adjusting his frayed robe indignantly, it's always been this way. 30 years ago, they stole money meant for the aqueduct, and now it's the temple. Nothing ever changes. His companion nods sagely, stroking a scraggly beard. Exactly. Corruption is the only thing in Ephesus more reliable than boredom itself. Their conversation is abruptly interrupted by shouting from the nearby street. Curious again, you move toward the commotion. A small mob has formed around a younger priest, accused of involvement in the theft. He protests loudly and with genuine desperation. I've done nothing wrong, he cries helplessly, eyes darting around for sympathy he clearly won't find. They're using me to hide their own guilt. The crowd responds with bored indifference rather than anger, shrugging as if corruption were simply another daily annoyance, akin to bad weather or insect bites. The priest's passionate defense dwindles quickly into hopeless silence, swallowed by the pervasive apathy surrounding him. You step back, somewhat shaken by this display of collective disinterest. Clearly, scandal in Ephesus is not shocking, it is merely expected. Everyone seems certain of one thing: no matter the outcome, nothing will truly change. Tomorrow will bring the same oppressive heat, the same tedious labor, and the same petty human failings. Late afternoon finds you back at the temple site, where the few remaining laborers work even more slowly and half heartedly than before, clearly demoralized by recent events. Diocles, the eternally weary foreman, sits alone atop a small pile of stone, head bowed in hopeless resignation. Approaching quietly, you ask gently about his thoughts on the unfolding scandal. He looks up slowly, his expression one of profound exhaustion. You know, he says softly, his voice weary and bitter, I've worked on temples my whole life. Every time it's the same: big promises, grand dreams, endless corruption. Do the gods even care? Probably not. But we keep building anyway, endlessly repeating our mistakes. He sighs deeply, a long exhalation containing decades of frustration and disappointment. They'll find someone guilty, publicly punish him, and pretend justice has been served. Then we'll return to work, knowing full well nothing changed. The temple will rise slowly, painfully, built not on marble, but lies and broken dreams. He falls silent again, lost in bitter contemplation. You stand quietly beside him, gazing at the half-finished columns bathed in the fading golden sunlight. In this quiet moment, you sense a deeper, sadder truth behind all the boredom, the scandals, the endless, repetitive disappointments of history. Human nature itself is endlessly cyclical, predictably flawed. Finally, as evening shadows stretch long and dark, you turn slowly back toward your modest room, burdened by the weight of witnessing history in all its frustrating triviality. Tomorrow promises more of the same, more scandal, more blame, more tedious repetition. And yet, despite yourself, you cannot turn away. History's dull, repetitive nature draws you back again and again to watch humanity stumble endlessly over its own feet, predictably, tediously, inevitably. At long last, after years filled with disappointments, scandals, arguments, and relentless boredom, the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus stands complete. You awake on this supposedly historic day, feeling oddly unmoved, fully aware that despite the completion of this wonder of the world, nothing much has changed. Stepping outside into the familiar heat, you make your way once more toward the temple site. Streets bustle quietly, but any excitement is muted, overshadowed by a pervasive sense of exhaustion. You overhear snippets of conversations marked by resignation rather than pride. Finally finished, is it? Good. Maybe now we can focus on something useful. You know they'll find some new temple or monument to waste our time on next. Even the shopkeepers seem weary, half-heartedly selling their goods without much expectation of increased business. To Ephesus, the temple's completion is little more than the tired conclusion to a long, tedious drama whose outcome everyone long ago stopped caring about. Approaching the temple grounds, you find a small crowd has assembled, though their faces show more obligation than genuine enthusiasm. At the front, the priests and city officials stand proudly, though you suspect their pride is as much an act as everything else you've seen in this place. The temple itself, you admit grudgingly, is indeed magnificent. White marble columns rise imposingly toward the clear, indifferent sky, their surfaces polished smooth, gleaming brilliantly in the morning sun. Sculptures of Artemis adorn the facade, her image poised and majestic. Yet beneath the surface, beauty lies the tedious truth of countless arguments, accidents, corruption, and petty human squabbles. The high priest, an elderly man with a voice perfectly suited to long winded monotony, steps forward to address the gathered crowd. You brace yourself for a speech certain to drain whatever remaining enthusiasm might linger. My friends, he begins dramatically, his voice carrying the dull drone of forced solemnity, we stand today before a testament to human persistence, divine grace, and civic virtue. You hear quiet murmurs of mild disbelief ripple through the crowd at his mention of civic virtue, considering recent scandals. Oblivious or simply indifferent, he continues his dreary monologue. Many believed this day would never arrive. Indeed, there were setbacks, injuries, disputes, delays, even accusations of wrongdoing. He pauses dramatically, too dramatically, you think, considering everyone is well aware of exactly how tedious those setbacks were. But through faith, determination, and the guiding hand of Artemis herself, we overcame every obstacle. We built a temple worthy of the goddess and of Ephesus itself. You glance around and notice faces among the crowd reflecting skepticism or mild irritation rather than awe. Clearly, the priest's enthusiasm does not match the townspeople's jaded realism. He drones on for what feels like hours, meticulously recapping every trivial obstacle faced during construction. You find yourself marveling at his ability to render even exciting moments utterly lifeless. He speaks of broken columns as if recounting the history of dried figs, tediously, slowly, and without emotion. Finally, mercifully, his speech ends, leaving only scattered applause behind. Diocles, your perpetually exhausted foreman, stands near the back, watching with an expression of deep, almost existential boredom. You approach quietly, sensing he might have something to say worth hearing, at least more interesting than the priest's tiresome rhetoric. What do you think? You ask him quietly, gesturing toward the temple. He shrugs slowly, a gesture embodying the weary resignation you've come to recognize as distinctly Ephesian. It's finished. That's all I feel, relief, mostly. I suppose it's impressive, but after spending so many years worrying about every stone and column, all I can really see is the work behind it, the endless frustration and arguments. He sighs deeply, a long, resigned sound echoing the sentiment of the entire city. They say people will travel far to admire our work. They'll call it magnificent, a wonder of the world. But they won't understand how dull, difficult, and tedious it was. They won't see the boredom and futility beneath the marble. You nod sympathetically. Somehow, Diocles' honesty feels more authentic than anything else you've heard today. He moves away slowly, vanishing quietly into the crowd, his duty at last complete. Later, you wander among the crowd, catching fragments of conversations reflecting a similarly cynical perspective. Well, now we have a temple. Does Artemis even care? My uncle worked here 10 years. He says it nearly killed him. For what? So strangers can stare at stones? They say it will attract pilgrims, bring money, but it'll also bring more problems. It always does. The citizen's weary commentary echoes your own thoughts. Even completed, the temple embodies the paradox of human ambition. People labor endlessly to achieve greatness, yet afterward, greatness itself seems meaningless, tedious, even disappointing. You pause one last time to admire, or perhaps merely observe, the finished temple. Visitors from distant lands will someday marvel at its scale, beauty, and perfection. They'll speak of Artemis's glory, of Ephesian pride, yet none will remember the monotonous, miserable process of its creation. That truth is yours alone, the memory of endless dullness, scandal, and petty frustrations beneath the gleaming marble. Evening arrives slowly, as indifferent as the city itself. The crowd disperses gradually, returning to their homes and routines, unimpressed and unchanged. Ephesus slips comfortably back into apathy, as though the temple's completion were merely another dull footnote in the city's tiresome history. Walking slowly back toward your humble lodging, you reflect on your time spent here. You arrived expecting history, excitement, drama, inspiration, but found instead boredom, monotony, futility. Yet perhaps you consider thoughtfully this dreary reality is history's true face. Beneath every great monument lies human banality, repetitive struggles, and perpetual dissatisfaction. Lying awake that night, staring upward at the cracked, unimpressive ceiling of your room, you feel a sense of profound relief and faint irony that your journey here concludes precisely as it began, in boredom, discomfort, and quiet resignation. The temple of Artemis, for all its glory, will soon become just another historical curiosity, admired briefly by passers-by before fading into obscurity. You close your eyes, drifting slowly toward sleep, comforted oddly by the unchanging predictability of human nature. No matter how grand the achievement, history always circles back to routine, monotony, and boredom. And perhaps, you muse drowsily, that's exactly how it should be. History, after all, is nothing if not endlessly, perfectly mundane.